Hello, everyone. Welcome to one more discussion of our show, which is Life in Progress. Listen to personal and professional stories. So, if you are new to this channel, new to this podcast show, you can subscribe to us, and so that you will get all the previous episodes because we have done a wonderful discussion with so many people. And our today's discussion with our guest, she is a sleep therapist. Yeah, she works with adults who are struggling a lot with insomnia. She is using specific therapies, and one of the therapy which she was discussing with me, that is the CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. She will tell all about that why the adults are feeling this specific problem insomnia and what are the various ways by which we can handle it. So let's listen with our guest, and her name is Tracy. She is a sleep therapist. Welcome, Tracy. Hello, everyone. As I was sharing with you, today we have with us Tracy. I have to learn a lot from her. I believe you as well, because she will be talking a lot about the sleep. Yes, you are listening right. And Tracy, whenever I heard that you are a sleep therapist, so honestly speaking, I am so curious to know that how you started your journey as a sleep therapist. Means, was it a pre-plan that you will become a sleep therapist? Or there was certain trigger, there were certain situations by which you are landed up here. So I want to know this is interesting story first.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, to be honest.
Okay.
Way back in my younger days, I was working in community mental health in California. And of course,
Okay.
in mental health settings, sleep issues go hand in hand, cause and consequence, and often happen at the same time.
Okay.
And around that time, I had also been in a situation where I'd suffered a bereavement and had my own bout of insomnia. So
Oh.
then I wasn't sure at that time how I got out of it, but moving forward, had another bout of quite bad insomnia a little bit later on, and I was living in the UK, different country. There was a lot going on. I had retrained as an osteopath and working in a pain practice, and of course, in a pain settings, sleep issues are very common too.
Oh.
And so I had taken up the initiative to do some additional study in sleep and evidence-based approaches for insomnia specifically. And then when the pandemic hit and everybody had to stay inside their houses, it was like the sign that said, it's time for you to take this online and do something
Oh.
serious with it. And so I basically went from doing it part-time alongside other things to mostly full-time since that happened in 2020. So
Oh,
it's a
great.
little bit of both, a little bit of personal experience and personal interest, a little bit of academic interest, professional exposure across a couple of different disciplines. And then, life often gives us, I guess, inspiration through circumstance and opportunities. So instead of seeing it as a really negative experience, well, I mean, and it was in a lot of ways, also the silver lining was it gave me the kick that I needed to move forward with something that I'd been considering doing for a long time.
True, Tracy. Ultimately, perfectly you are telling. In fact, I should say that there are the situation we can label it negative, or it is up to us only. We can label it positive as well. So same thing you have done. You have
Hmm.
labeled all the situations as positive, and you decided that I will turn into a blessing rather than just being in the disguise. So, Tracy, now I want to ask you some specific things. Like you
Sure.
told that you are dealing with insomnia. Many people do not resonate a lot with this word. So first I want to understand from you that what exactly is insomnia, and is the insomnia just a simple thing like the normal sleep disturbances, or it is something else, it's a specific thing? How can I understand about it?
This is a
Could be a
really
silly
great
question, but I want to know about
this
it.
is a great question because there's lots of elements that could be unpacked from this.
Okay.
And at least when I'm online and looking in forums and various things, people use the word insomnia to mean any kind of sleeping problem.
Yes.
And insomnia is a very specific sleeping problem that's very different from other sleeping problems. There are about 85 different kinds of sleep disorders, never mind physical conditions that can contribute to sleeping difficulty. So there's a lot of different reasons why people can have difficulty with sleep.
Oh.
And sometimes we sabotage our own sleep by not sleeping when we ought to, and we stay up late working and partying and doing things like that. But if we look at the host of, to simplify all sleep disorders, insomnia is very different from the others. The others are characterized by pathological sleepiness and difficulty sleeping at night, but the sleepiness predominates during the daytime. With insomnia, people have difficulty sleeping at night, but they also are kind of tired and wired. And insomnia can develop organic elements to it, but it's primarily a psychobiological disorder rather than a medical condition. I view it as essentially a very specific phobia of not sleeping.
Is that
And
so? It's a phobia?
yeah, it is a lycophobia. I mean, if you look in the diagnostic and statistical manuals, they're going to lump it in. It's going to be labeled as a sleep disorder. But the characteristic feature of insomnia, as opposed to other sleep disorders, is that the thing that keeps it going is a fear of not sleeping. And we feed that a lot in a lot of different ways. And I'm sure we will unpack a lot of that during the conversation. But if you remove that fear of not sleeping, and the changes people make to their sleep that they think they're going to help their sleep, but actually hurt their sleep, then sleeping returns to normal. So there isn't any medical intervention actually required. Whereas if you have obstructive sleep apnea or restless leg syndrome or one of the many, many other different kinds of sleep disorders, sometimes medical intervention is necessary in order for a person to A, sleep better, and B, have a better quality of life during the daytime. But with insomnia, with psychobiological insomnia, removing the fear of not sleeping sorts the issue out. And of course, that's easier said than done. And that's part of the process.
Great. So Tracy, you are just describing two terms. You are telling that insomnia is related to psychobiological. I could able to understand the psycho part of this insomnia. Can you just throw some light on the biological part? Then why we are calling it a psychobiological?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you take a person who's had a negative experience or a positive experience, some kind of excitement that keeps them awake at night, normal in the short term, right? Happens to everybody. And then as time moves on and that issue kind of fades into the past, some people go back to sleeping normally. And some people, because they've become worried about their sleep, they start to sleep poorly, and then they become more worried about their sleep, and then they sleep even more poorly. And what begins to happen is that people adapt their behaviors in such a way that it impacts their sleep biology. So they'll start sleeping in late. If they get a poor night of sleep, they'll go to bed early. They'll stay in bed awake, trying really hard to keep still so that maybe sleep will come. And all of these things have an effect on the biological side of sleep. It erodes sleep drive, which is a chemical pressure that builds sleep. And it creates a different kind of contextual cue. And what I mean by that is before we have issues with sleep, the bed is just a place that we go and we sleep. We usually spent a fair bit of money on a nice mattress. It's the place we sleep, or that we're cozy and relaxed, and that's all that happens. And then we live our life, and then we go back and forth. So the bed is a cue for sleep. But after spending a lot of time awake in bed and being really distressed, the bed can literally become a cue for feeling anxious. So you can have somebody who might be downstairs feeling sleepy biologically, they're mentally relaxed and rested. And then they go up and they put their head on the pillow and their brain starts to go and their cortisol starts to pump. And this is because they've accidentally become trained to have this physical and psychological response to being in the bed. And that usually happens over time, where the bed becomes the battleground as opposed to the nice, relaxing, cozy, safe space. So that's how it becomes more of a psychobiological process, as it develops.
Great explanation, Tracy. Means it feels as I'm also learning a lot in this conversation. One specific term you mentioned just now in this explanation, that the person starts feeling anxious because when they're not able to sleep. So, is there any connection that the people who have the anxiety disorders, they are tend to have, or they are more vulnerable to have insomnia? Is there any correlation in these two disorders?
Yeah, absolutely. So within the behavioral sleep medicine world, we have what's called the 3P model. One is predisposing factors, which is, does somebody have more of a chance of developing insomnia than another person? And when we're thinking about predisposing factors, we're thinking about mental health conditions, primarily anxiety disorders. Perfectionism is actually a personality trait that's strongly associated with the development of insomnia as well. And you can imagine if a person is more anxious or needs things to be a certain way in order to feel safe, and suddenly they can't, they're not sleeping as much as they want to, they would view that as a very negative thing that they then had to control and try to make be a certain way. That's the recipe by which perfectionism and anxiety lead to more predisposition to develop insomnia. So you have the predisposing factors, then you have a precipitating factor, which is like maybe a bereavement or a wedding or something exciting, that short-term sleep. If you're really nervous about the fact that you're not sleeping very well, then that's when we move into the things that perpetuate the sleeplessness over time. And people who are anxious are much more likely to do that than people who are not. I speak from experience, being both a perfectionist and an anxious person. I can see the dynamic in my past as well.
No, Tracy, that's beautifully quoted. All the experience which you are telling, I was just rewinding something in my mind, that almost all the corporate professionals, the moment you said the word perfectionism, immediately it clicked into my mind the corporate persons, because there are many persons who feel that perfectionism is a positive trait. Okay, it would be, or definitely it should be, I'm not denying with that. But what if when this perfectionism start interfering with your own life, with your own health? So that's an important point which you are mentioning. One more thing, Tracy, which is coming just with your answer. Like in many adults now, that's a lifestyle that we are bound to use a lot, these tech gadgets like internet uses, smartphones. Continuously we have to be online. There are certain professions in which the persons have to be online, they're bound to be. So with your studies, with your experience, have you experienced that this kinds of tech, they are also creating this specific disorder, or they are also just putting a specific fire or a specific alarm to this particular disorder?
Yeah, that's very interesting, because you have people who sleep procrastinate, but they don't have insomnia. And they're the person who tends to stay up late because they're addicted to their device. But when they do turn it off, then they sleep. There are people who are scrolling in the middle of the night looking for answers to their sleeping problems. This
So
is where
that
it
is
can really
anxious behavior.
Yeah, the anxious behavior, the filling the space behaviors, the searching for the answer behaviors, that idea that if we know enough, we can control sleep, and we can't control sleep. So that becomes a vicious circle. But I think even more important than the content that people might read online is this gravitation toward perfecting these things. Lots of different wearable devices and apps, which give us lots of information. When it comes to sleep, particularly sleep staging, they are not accurate. So you're giving somebody who wants information because they think it's going to help them, information that they then are trying to use in some way to control or manipulate their sleep. That creates more of a problem because it creates the illusion of control, which will always backfire. And it's not accurate anyway. And it creates an over focus in the daytime. I sometimes will ask people, about their sleep. And rather than telling me how they feel at night or how they feel during the day, they want to show me their app and their watch. And I'm like, no, I'm very interested in how you feel and how you perceive your sleep, because that's the most important element. This obsession with, getting 8 hours, for example. Not everybody needs 8 hours. That is, it's like the mode across a population, kind of, or the mean, it falls, between 7 and 9. Lots of people get between 7 3/4 and 8.5. That doesn't mean if you get 7 that there's something wrong and then you need to strive to get the 8. It really is a matter of how do you feel during the day. And that gets missed out if people are following the minutes on their watch, especially if they're tracking their sleep at night. It's one of the worst things people can do for their sleep. So I think that's a bigger issue than sleep procrastination.
That's a pretty interesting word you are using, sleep procrastination. And I just want to share one important point here. That's my experience and what I have learned. That in the yogic practices, the people says that there are certain meditations and there are certain practices wherein if you start doing it for the longer period of time, so it's not necessary, as you are telling, watching the time in your by your watch, that how many hours I slept. Rather than, it's important that what is the quality of your sleep, Probably it
Mm.
could be someone for 4 hours or maybe 5 hours, or probably for someone it's not enough even for 10 to 12 hours. So I believe that's the thing which you are telling. That's really interesting.
Yeah, very, very important point there. If I asked a room full of people, would you rather get 6.5 hours of really good sleep,
Hmm.
or would you rather get 8 or 9 hours of really broken sleep? Most
Hmm.
people would say, I'd rather get 6.5 hours of good sleep. Now, that
Same
six
with
and a half
me.
hours might not be enough for that particular person, but it's a very frustrating experience to toss and turn and toss and turn and toss and turn. So that's
True.
where the issue of the numbers gets completely lost. And sleep quality affects how we feel during the day.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the most
very true.
important take home from that, not the number of minutes.
True, true, Tracy. So now we have, you have in fact explained me and to everyone that anxiety, and there are certain psychobiological issues, and definitely the gadgets. Are there in your case studies or with your clients, did you come across any other triggers of insomnia in the adults which we have missed to discuss?
Perimenopause is a big one.
Oh, really?
Yeah, hormonal influences as either with perimenopause that comes on naturally as a function of getting older and going through that transition, particularly surgical menopause when people have their ovaries removed.
Oh,
That can have a massive impact on somebody's sleep. But the good news is that sleep therapy, particularly cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, works even in populations who are dealing with that particular element. So if you imagine somebody is perimenopausal and they're having hot flushes at night,
hmm.
you might have something that wakes you up. Could be a child, could be a hot flush, could be a cat.
Hmm.
It's your response to that wake up that dictates whether you're going to fall back to sleep more quickly or whether or not you're going to stay awake or engage in other behaviors that affect your sleep. So, and what's really interesting, and I was surprised by this until I spoke to a menopause specialist, that
Okay.
if you looked at groups of women who were undergoing different interventions, such as menopause education, I think acupuncture was the second group, and then CBTI was the third group, and they
Oh,
looked at, well, what happens to these women's sleep. The CBTI group improved the most with their sleep, but they also reported fewer hot flushes. And when I asked the specialist, why is this? I don't understand it. She said, it makes perfect sense to me.
hmm.
Because again, if we interpret these physical things that are happening to us in a negative way and become stressed and upset about them, A, it makes them worse, and B, that erodes our quality of life. And we got into having a very interesting conversation about cultural influences and how we interpret these changes in our
Oh my
bodies.
God.
Yeah, because there are some cultures where it's viewed as a natural transition, and there are some where it's viewed as a slow downhill slide into the ground. How you view it is quite important, it turns out. And it's the same thing with sleep. How you view sleep and sleeplessness has a huge impact on how you roll with the natural flow of what happens with sleep.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. Means it seems like the seasons of life and seasons of sleep. So you need to
Yes.
understand in which season of
Yes.
sleep you are falling now.
I
That's
love the way you put that.
that's pretty interesting. You
Hmm.
are telling a lot about CBTI, and really, I want to discuss about that. But before we go into the deep discussion of CBTI, I just want to understand that if a person is in initial phase of the sleep disturbances,
Mhm.
even not reached to insomnia,
Yeah.
so do you prescribe any natural therapies or natural remedies wherein we are not going with specific therapies, but yes, some preventions or some natural things by which yes, I can have a good amount, good quality of sleep, and I do not fall into the category of insomnia?
That's a great one. So when somebody comes to me and they say, I've been having trouble for a few weeks, the
Mm-hmm.
most important thing I think is to have a conversation around the normalization of short bouts of sleeplessness to help take some of the fear away.
Hmm.
And with somebody in a situation like that, you don't want to turn fixing sleep into a big project because that puts too much emphasis on it. So this is where I would have a more of a sleep hygiene and more of a lifestyle conversation as opposed to a fixing sleep conversation. So some of the principles, like getting up at the same time every day and not lying in, getting physical activity, getting light in the morning, journaling, if they're stressed out and there's something going on, journaling to get that all out of your head, planning ahead so that you're not waking in the night thinking about things that you have to do. We would keep it quite simple in those particular circumstances, because you don't want to catastrophize about a short bout of sleeplessness and put a big magnifying glass on it, because we really want that to fade into the background and not start to feed itself. Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting, Tracy. One time when you were telling that at night we just keep on reminding that something I have to do, something I have to do. So that's a very interesting thing which I also read, that it's keep all the material aside. Means I was just listening to one spiritual guru, and he said that before you go to bed at night, you just think that everything I have given up to someone, and then I'm going to bed, just me and myself, that's it. So that's I always remember. Now
there's lots of different ways to do that, and I love that. It's really
yeah,
good. I often teach my clients ways of leaving the night behind, because
yes,
usually the night is a negative, and using doorways and natural structures in our worlds to create cues for shifting our mind about how we view sleep and
wonderful.
showing up 100% even though you're tired.
Wonderful. And now I want to discuss the specific therapy which you have mentioned, that CBT, that cognitive behavioral therapy. So, can you just throw some light that what is this therapy and what are the benefits, and at what stage you apply this therapy?
Yeah. So once somebody is having difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up too early for a prolonged period of time, several months, this is when we can start employing more structured approaches. And the need for structured approaches might be a little bit earlier, might be a little bit later, depending on where somebody's at. But in general, CBTI is, and growingly ACTI, which is acceptance and commitment therapy for insomnia. And I use both together. But certainly CBTI has 30 years of evidence behind it. If you go and you look up in PubMed, what's the treatment for quote unquote chronic insomnia? I don't like the word chronic very much, but if that's what you look up, CBTI, CBTI, CBTI. If you look at all of the guidelines in all of the major medical associations and sleep associations around the world, CBTI, CBT. There's just not enough people to deliver it. And it's not the same as regular CBT. So I think it's a bit misnamed. There are elements that overlap. So if we're looking at the pillars of CBTI, one is sleep hygiene, but it's actually quite a small one. And these are all of the things that you can read on the internet. Is the room dark? Is it cool? All of those things. But once somebody has insomnia and it's kind of developed from the inside, it's being perpetuated from the inside, changing those external things doesn't help very much. So the other 4 pillars tend to look at how can we maximize the biological drive somebody has for sleep, which gets eroded by people's sleep behaviors. We look at the relationship with the bed. We want to nurture a relationship with the bed that is cozy, safe, relaxing, and associated with happy feelings, not anxious feelings. Then we want to look at, well, if these negative thoughts and feelings have developed and people have changed these behaviors, how do we get underneath that to uproot them? And really, it's in the fear of not sleeping. So looking at the kinds of cognitive distortions people experience around control of sleep, fear of consequences of lack of sleep, and all of those sorts of pieces. That's where there's an overlap with CBT. And having a little bit of a knowledge about sleep and insomnia and what is a distortion and what isn't, that can be really helpful as well. And then training in, a lot of people approach this as training in relaxation techniques, but I'm a little hesitant to approach the treatment of insomnia with a heavy emphasis on relaxation techniques alone. Because, and I take more of a mindfulness point of view with this element, and relaxation is something that is a 24/7 thing that we should be giving ourselves. And we should be setting our day up in a way that we can structure our mental self so that we are more relaxed. And so when it comes to mindfulness and relaxation, I look at these things not as, you pull out this trick on a card and you do it if you can't sleep, because that becomes a sleep effort. It becomes something that we're doing to try to make sleep happen. And the more we do that, the more we're telling our arousal system and our safety brain that we're in danger if we don't sleep. So I like to look at the relaxation element more from a mindfulness side, and how can you practice mindfulness during the day, which has a knock-on benefit of helping improve sleep, but mainly improves people's quality of life,
That's
which
great.
then obviously helps their sleep. So if you had to look at these pillars, it would be sleep hygiene is a little one. Once somebody has insomnia, relaxation, mindfulness, a cognitive restructuring, and looking at the two biological elements, the sleep drive buildup and timings, and the psychobiological relationship with the bed. So that kind of encompasses those 5 different pillars. And
That's
with
pretty
some people, you
interesting.
start at the beginning, biology, and sometimes you start the other way. It depends on how much anxiety is present.
Oh, I mean, it depends on case to case and person to person.
I like to view it that way. If somebody has a tremendous amount of sleep anxiety and you ask them to spend less time in bed in order to build their sleep drive, and you're not providing enough context and support, the first thing that person is going to do is get even more nervous because they've spent years saying, well, I have to be in bed so that I might get a little bit of extra sleep. It takes it takes more unpacking.
True.
And I think it's more important to set somebody up for success than it is to follow a script. Like session 1, you do this, session 2, you do this, session 3, you do this. Sometimes it's more important to start in the stuff that maybe might come in a session 5 and then work your way back around to 1 or 2, depending on the person.
Yeah, I can
It's
understand that.
successful. It's
Hmm.
still successful. But if it makes it so hard for somebody that they can't, or they're no longer willing to do it, then they've thrown the baby out with the bathwater and nobody's gotten anywhere. So I tend to be a bit more flexible with that.
That's great, Tracy. And I believe all these tricks comes from experience. No one can understand and no one can learn these tricks by just joining any course or just by going to any classes. It comes with experience. Okay,
Hmm.
one interesting thing I just want to ask you. You have gone through many clients, and yes, many people come to you with their specific disorders.
Mhm.
So, any specific anonymous case study, if you can share in brief to all of us, wherein you start with a specific problem and the person get cured. So, how was the feeling? How was your feeling, and how was that person's feeling? If it
It is the
allows you.
best feeling ever. I gotta tell you. And it varies quite a lot. So I could look at somebody who, for example, a client from the past, he had had difficulty sleeping, falling asleep, and difficulty with waking up early for about 10 years. So this person engaged in a certain kind of routine, and they felt like they were doing everything they could to help their sleep in such an obsessive way that they practically had a spreadsheet of activities that they had to do at a certain time. Couldn't go out
I
at night
believe
because they'd
I'm
have to
just
be home early enough.
I'm just interrupting, and I believe that person, if the person was suffering from that sleep disorder, so the person would have definitely be taken certain medications as well.
Yeah, this person was not at that point, but they had in the past. Yeah,
Oh,
they had in the past. Yep. But they felt worse on their medication than when they might sleep a little bit better, but they felt worse. And so the trade-off was not there.
okay.
So it was taking this person a couple of hours to fall asleep, and they were waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And not being a morning person. For me, that wouldn't be so bad, but for some people, it's terrible. We made to start off with, we made 2 small changes to where and when they did certain things at night,
Hmm.
and went to bed. Instead of going to bed and doing these activities, we just changed that and set a fixed wake up time in the morning. This person would often wake up before that time, but I would say this will be the time. This is the suggested time to get out of bed and begin your day.
Okay.
And so we kind of structured the biological side of things to maximize the sleep drive and to minimize how much wakefulness time was in the bed. That was step number 1 for them. And 6 days later, this gent wrote me and said, like, I can't believe I'm falling asleep in 15 minutes. This is unbelievable. But we still had work to do, though, because there was still this agenda of trying to control and find things out. And with early morning awakenings in particular, they are the most sensitive to that kind of arousal because we're already sleeping lighter anyway in the
Hmm.
morning. So that element took a lot longer, but that person's satisfaction with their sleep changed really dramatically, and they were getting much deeper sleep in that shorter block to begin with. And as time went on, working on that arousal, sleeping a little bit later in the morning and expanding that window out, they started doing really well. So that person was a person where we started with the biological elements first. Sometimes we need to work on the fear piece first, and a lot of sleep education and looking at how people are thinking and how to, these thoughts become like habit loops in the brain. And it's just like, if you smell your grandmother's cooking, it brings back all of this stuff. Or if you see something that triggers this memory, this loop, things that fire together, wire together, and they can kind of become these habits, right? These habit loops. So where can we find an off-ramp and strengthen a different loop and minimize how much feedback we're giving to the one that is not serving us? So that element sometimes needs a little bit more emphasis in the beginning.
Wow, that's really interesting. Means I could feel that what could be your feeling when you are dealing with your clients, and yes, when they are coming up to you with their success stories. And definitely I can understand that that gives us a lot of satisfaction and fulfillment, that yes, we are able to help someone. I believe that is the biggest thing that you would be feeling.
Yeah. And sometimes the best help you can give somebody, and this is happens to me as well, is referring them to somebody who's more appropriate for them. Because again, a lot of people use insomnia to mean all different kinds of sleeping problems. But as part of my assessment, I might say, actually, I think you might have insomnia as well, but if you don't deal with this, you're not going to feel better and you're not going to sleep better. So I send them away to get more appropriate care and then come back. And that means a lot to me too. Because delaying an appropriate diagnosis and treatment for something that I can't do anything with, I can't help, is just not the right thing to do.
Tracy, I
It's not
believe
why
that
I'm in
is
this business.
true, very true. And I believe that is the first quality of a coach, of a good coach, that yes, you are not taking everything on you, that is, I can do everything. But yes,
Yeah.
guiding the person, I believe that's the ultimate thing which a coach has to do. Wonderful, Tracy.
Yeah.
And though I told you that I know I have so many questions and I have taken a lot of your time,
Keep
though there is
going.
a
I
lot
don't
of
mind.
time difference we are talking in. But yeah, before I end this conversation, I just want to ask you one last thing, that
Sure.
we know that we are living in a society or in a culture, maybe the work pressure or anything, that sometime we may fall into that specific zone. Definitely, when someone is into that specific disorder zone, that the person will seek the therapist and the coaches. But any advice with your whole experiences in the last so many years which you have spent in this specific domain, and specific advice you would like to give to the adults, to the professionals, that how they can take care of themselves. And when I'm asking take care of themselves, means take care of their sleep, because that is the first thing which is neglected when it comes to work.
Yeah, especially for people who are working for themselves and working from home, because the contextual cues and boundaries are different and they get less reinforcement at home, at least if you don't have a separate office. Right. So if you're a professional who doesn't have a separate office like myself, really having those boundaries is even more important. I found for myself, because I do tend to be a perfectionist, I do tend to be an anxious person, I've relaxed a lot about a lot of things, but we all have little areas where we're more prone to run down the rabbit hole. Just the hyper awareness of that. Planning ahead, putting things out in some sort of structure, because doing this, it tells the brain we've got it and it doesn't need to remind us all night long. Closing the laptop at whatever the end of the day is, and having some sort of ritual that sets work behind. And when you're dealing with people, obviously, because a lot of people are helping professionals, and especially in this capacity, you want to be responsive and you want to help, but you have to have a boundary around when you're communicating so that you can keep space for yourself. And that's often very difficult in the beginning of somebody's coaching or therapeutic journey as a therapist.
I believe most difficult.
It's so difficult. And I started by doing simple things like setting out of office messages on the weekend, because it kind of gave me permission They know that I've got the message. It gave me permission to have that boundary for myself. And now it comes much more naturally. Even if I forget to turn it on, I'm like, I said I was going to do something else on Saturday afternoon, and I'm going to go do it. And it's easier. It gets easier over time. But the same thing in the evening, especially working, 5 years ago, we should have all bought stock in Zoom and these other platforms. Working across multiple time zones creates additional complexities and especially on social media, where a lot of us spend time talking and being present for people, we are so habituated to having an instant response, and we have to take ourselves away from that pressure. So having some way to kind of, if you don't have a separate room, create a ritual around closing the laptop and leaving the work behind. And it's not selfish. I think that's a really important message. Not selfish, because if you can be 100% for yourself, you're going to be able to turn around and be 100% for your clients, and you won't feel burnt out and you won't feel resentful. You'll be excited to hear from them, but that piece is a journey. And all of those things that we can set up in the daytime to help create good boundaries will help prevent sleep procrastination, and it will help prevent intrusive thoughts at night that can keep us awake. And there'll still be times when that happens, if we're doing something exciting, or something really juicy is going on, about to launch the thing, or going to a conference and you're really excited about it. But all of those things will happen. Just have to roll with the flow with the sleep piece. Even myself, with all of the skills and experience I have under my belt, I still experience things that disrupt my sleep, but it doesn't distress me anymore.
Because you know how to bounce
the big
back.
difference. I know that I will eventually bounce back and that it will pass. And so it's easier for me to keep my hands off of it than to try to not control it.
That's perfect. And Tracy, when you was giving those advices, I was just having flashback in my mind. Oh my God, I often do such kind of thing. I do not close my laptop. I do not just shut down my system. These things, these are the basic things which we are not doing, and then we start complaining about the sleep disorders.
Yeah,
So
it can help to have things like indoor hobbies that you get really enthusiastic about in the evening to make it easier to close the laptop. So I took up knitting, and I knit a long time ago, but now I knit ferociously. And I look forward to the end of the day where I can start working on my project, and it makes it a little easier. It's hard to force yourself with willpower to change a habit, because those habits become biological and they're psychological. And if we don't know what to do with the time, we will default to working or scrolling on Facebook or whatever the default is for somebody. So having habits to replace that is important.
True. Perfectly. That's a very important tip which you have given, that we should have a specific hobby which will push us from our work towards that hobby. And if I'm not having anything to do, so definitely my brain will take me to the social media and the other stuff. That's a perfect thing which you have just told to everyone. And Tracy, I know that's a beautiful discussion we all are doing, and you are sharing a lot about this specific problem which usually the people neglect. And when it reached to the peak, when it reached to beyond something, when we are not able to control it, and then we are running here and there, and probably we are not able to understand that other issues in our life are just because of this basic fundamental thing of human life, which is sleep, which we have started neglecting for past so many years. So I know I have to thank you from the bottom of my heart for this beautiful discussion which we all are doing today. And really, I look forward to have one more discussion with you on knitting, because that's a new thing which you have picked up. And with
I'm so excited. I love it so much. And it doesn't have to be crafting. It can be anything that gets you excited and pulls you forward, where you have to learn something and keep developing. Because I think as human beings, we need that.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I truly agree with that and truly resonate with this statement. And I do not want to end this discussion, because I'm feeling as if I'm sitting in front of you and talking, though we are from a different parts of
we just need a cup of tea.
True, 100%. Yeah. I wish that sometime I'm sitting with you in the physical mode and having a cup of tea and then recording this episode. So that's the wish I'm doing it today. And with your permission, I would just like to give your details, your LinkedIn details, so that if someone needs your expert guidance, your advice, so they can connect with you so that they can get at least the better advice. Because for that, if you allow, so I would like to give your details in the description of this particular episode.
Absolutely. Be very happy to be connected on LinkedIn if people are on Instagram. I offer a free 20-minute chat if people want to
Great.
talk about how I might be able to help them and if I'm the right match to work with them.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's a service part which you are doing, and that's really impressive. So, again, thank you, Tracy. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you so much. This has been so nice.
Same from my side. Thanks a lot for giving time and doing this wonderful and beautiful discussion with all of us.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
so
Tracy.
much.
Thanks a lot. Have a lovely and nice day.